Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our main event! Hosted by Eric McMahon, it's Cageside with Jon Morgan!
And welcome everybody to another episode of Cageside with Jon Morgan. I am your host, Eric McMahon. Last week, go ahead, check us out in the archives. We went over the dark week that was MMA, the Phil Baroni story, and unfortunately the Dana White story. We really dived heavily into that. A lot to talk about. Actually, we could broach that on this week's episode. But before we get into anything, let me bring in the man, the co-host, the guy whose name is on the marquee. You can follow him on Twitter at JonMorgan_MMA. His name is Jon Morgan. What's up, pal?
Good, man. I'm good. It's so crazy, right? Because you talked about it. You know, we had this kind of off period, so to speak, with no fights going on. And as you mentioned, the dark news. And then we get back to fights, and we were so excited to just have fights. But then we get crazy news. You know what I mean? This news was just dropping out of the sky on Saturday night. And it's like, man, we are back full swing now. There's so much going on and so much to talk about.
So, just to give a little peek behind the curtain to everybody, me and Jon, we jump on this streaming service. He's obviously in Vegas. I'm in Memphis, Tennessee. And we kind of go over what the show is. And I kind of led with a joke. What do you think we should talk about? Which is kind of self-evident, right?
Yeah, right. It's like, oh, by the way, the reigning UFC heavyweight champion Francis Ngannou is no longer with the UFC. And oh, by the way, Jon Jones, the long-awaited 3-year break to get back to action, that's official now. And oh, by the way, he's fighting for the heavyweight title against Ciryl Gane. And I mean, oh, by the way, Dana just like, oh yeah, and Leon Edwards, Kamaru Usman, that's done for London as well. I forgot to mention that. I mean, it's just,
by the way, the T-Mobile Center actually broke it before anybody else did. But I digress. We were going to get it. Let's get into that here in a second. But we do have to you were at the Apex Center this weekend, UFC Fight Night. Who cares? Jon Strickland won. He took it on a week's notice. Are we done?
I mean, listen, you hate to be that rude, but yeah, it kind of feels that way. I mean, look, Dan Ige had an amazing win.
Iced him with a check hook, man.
Oh my gosh, it was such a big one for him. Roman Kopylov looked amazing. Umar Nurmagomedov, that dude better be on your radar because that dude is a monster moving forward. As for the main event, Sean Strickland, I mean, look, it wasn't a fight that was heavily anticipated. I'll admit I had it wrong. I thought Nasruddin Imavov was going to kind of be able to make a statement here in his main event. Instead, Sean Strickland coming off the couch on 5 days' notice to replace Kelvin Gastelum. Got the job done. So, but yeah, I mean, you hate to not give these athletes their due because, they're going out there and putting it on the line and picking up victories. But when you talk about the very biggest names in the sport, when you talk about moves to different organizations, I mean, it takes all the headlines. It takes all the energy. There's just no question about it.
One last thing on UFC Fight Night is it was, I think, the premier fight on the prelims. I cannot remember the guy's name, from Afghanistan. Who is he? I forgot his name. Yeah. Unbelievably impressive. That's why I love these fight nights. You're seeing guys like this. He is a problem.
Yeah, you're referring to Javid Basharat, and he did. He looked phenomenal against another undefeated guy that looked good as well. Mateus Mendonça looked good as well. So yeah, when you're looking at these fight night cards, you got to remember what you're watching for. I mean, I see a lot of people talking about, oh man, this card doesn't have anything on it. And that's okay to say that, I guess. But the truth is what you're seeing is that next generation. Who do I need to be paying attention to? Who is going to be making waves, here in 6 months, a year, 18 months down the road? You're looking for those people developing, and a lot of people really did take statements and make moves going forward. Hey, Abdul Razak Al Hassan, a guy that's been around for a long time, but really showed some patience and got a devastating finish. I mean, there were some great performances to talk about, but man, with everything that happened afterwards. And it's so crazy. You alluded to it, right? I mean, we're sitting there inside the UFC Apex kind of watching fights unfold, and we've always got social media open, right? And all of a sudden the media starts circulating this picture of T-Mobile Arena right down the road from the UFC Apex. Somebody has taken a picture on a billboard that, the big bright lights up at the top. It says Jon Jones versus Ciryl Gane, and they start circulating around a little bit. And at first I looked at it and I thought, man, maybe a Photoshop. I mean, it's a good Photoshop, but maybe a Photoshop. Let's be careful about what we're doing here. And then a second photo of it started circulating. And then video of it started circulating. At that point, I said, well, it's a little bit harder. I mean, not that you can't manipulate video as well, but it's a little more difficult than a Photoshop. And then sure enough, we're sending texts around and people are saying, well, it's not quite done, etc. Fight's over with. And Dana White walks back to the press conference room and says, listen, I know exactly what you're going to ask about, so don't bother asking. Let me go ahead and get into it. Similar to the way we started out this show, is it like, hey, I already know what the topic of conversation is going to be. And he just said, yeah, believe it or not, T-Mobile Arena blew this, man. They made the announcement before we could make the announcement, but this is official. And the thing is, at the time, it's crazy, right? Because we know this fight's happening. We've seen the photos. We've seen the video. And you're like, all right, so is this going to be an interim title? Or how does that work with the title situation? What's going on here? And so when he says, yep, T-Mobile Arena blew it, this fight's happening, it's not really shocking. You're like, okay. Right. And he's like, and Francis Ngannou is gone. He's out.
Let's put a timeout right there, because we're going to start, which I would think is a chronological order of how it played out with the UFC. Now, Dana White, post-fight press conference from UFC Fight Night, comes in, he says the aforementioned, everything you just kind of talked about. With that being said, Francis Ngannou is out. Dana White claiming that they had made him an offer to be the highest paid heavyweight of all time. And if anybody is looking at numbers, I mean, Brock Lesnar made a grip of money. So we are talking about substantial money here. And the one thing, and we've broached on this in the infancy of this podcast, is what is the real deal with Francis's contract. Originally, he said he had no fights on his deal. Then we come to find out he actually had a fight on his deal. So did the UFC cut him? Did the UFC release him from an obligation? Did he refuse to fight? We know they offered him a contract, but I thought he had one fight still left on his contract. Let's take us through that really quick, because I think that's a really important little point here.
Yeah, and these contracts aren't made public, so they're not documented. But my understanding is the same, Eric, that he had one fight left on his deal. But the key point is that there was a sunset clause in his agreement, which means he signed this deal in December of 2017. There was a clause in there that it expires at the end of 5 years. Now, the UFC can extend contracts. If they offer you a fight and you don't take the fight, you turn it down, they can extend that contract, but only so many times and only so long. And if you're not able to fight, you have injuries that you can't compete, and that all these things play into it. But at the end of the day, there was a contract agreement in there that at the end of 5 years, this thing is done. So that would have been in December. At that point, now in the last year or so, I mean, the UFC has been working behind the scenes to try to get a new deal in place with Francis Ngannou, but they simply could not come to terms. Now, what we don't know is exactly what the terms are that couldn't be agreed upon. And I'm sure, in the coming weeks, Francis Ngannou, perhaps his representation, Markel Martin, maybe they'll come out and do some interviews and explain what it was. I don't necessarily think it just boiled down to dollars, if I'm being honest with you. Francis Ngannou had repeatedly expressed some frustration that he didn't have the freedom that he wanted in the UFC contracts. He's expressed an opportunity, a desire to have an opportunity to box. Obviously, the UFC is not going to allow you to do that. They're going to keep you under their contractual agreement. So I don't know that it necessarily boiled down to money as so much that it boiled down to he wants to take advantage of other opportunities. But regardless, they tried to tender him a new deal. They could not come to terms on an agreement of a new deal. And then I think the UFC does like they like to do, which is kind of set the narrative a little bit, right? And they say, because technically they do have matching rights, all right? So the contract terminated at the end of December, but then he could go out there and get offers from other organizations, and the UFC can say, you know what? We'll match the terms of those deals. You're going to stay with us. We saw something similar happen recently with Kayla Harrison, right? She was a free agent, went and signed a contract with Bellator, or at least got the offer, and PFL said, nope, we'll give you those exact terms, because they had matching rights as well. They said, We'll give you the exact terms that you got. You stay with us. And so that's what was an offer here. The UFC says, you know what? We're just going to let the guy go. We're not going to match anything. He's free to go do whatever he wants. So as of this morning, he can technically sign wherever he wants, and there will be no matching clause from the UFC.
And that is very UFC-esque. UFC and Dana White is saying, if you don't want to be here, go. If you think it's better somewhere else, go. No, conveniently at the end of contracts, right? But that is a very Dana White-esque move. Now, with all that being said, do we know, like, is it a contentious relationship? Because Dana White comes out and, like I would, I'm going to tell my side of the story that I want out there, right? And the story that Dana White in the press conference in front of you, while you specifically are asking him questions, is saying, a lot of it has to do with probably not wanting to fight who everybody considers the greatest fighter of all time. I'm sure that played into it to a degree. So I asked that, is that relationship, or was it contentious? I'm sure negotiations get heated, but is it a bitter relationship? And then two, is there any merit to that claim?
I mean, listen, I'm sure there's definitely some frustration between them. Now, I had previously asked, Dana, over the course of this kind of year or two that they'd been negotiating, when it seemed like they were at standstills, I had asked him a couple times, hey, is this like in an irreparable spot? I mean, are you guys in a place where you can't get something done? And he always, at least publicly, has said, oh, man, it's good. We're talking. We're going to get things going. But again, I guess that's probably setting the terms of the narrative, like, hey, no, all's good behind here. We're going to get this thing worked out. And then I think, I don't know if there's any real personal hatred or anything like that, but Dana's doing what a promoter does. It's like, look, if this guy's going to leave, let's just say, he's tainted goods as he walks out the door. He doesn't want to fight the best in the world. I don't know. He didn't want to fight the best in the world. I don't think that's what it really boiled down to. I don't think Francis Ngannou walked in here and says, look, man, I'm not taking that fight. I'm afraid of that fight. I'm not going to do that. Fighters, man. Fighters, They have to have almost an insane level of self-confidence and self-belief to do what they do. Nobody thinks, I can't beat that guy. I can't be in here. So I don't think that was the case. But again, that's the UFC getting out ahead of it. I mean, there's been very few times where he hasn't done. That's why I remember when Shane Burgos left to go to the PFL and Dana actually said, we messed up on this one, man. I like that kid. Yeah. We should have had him around. Yes. That's why it stood out so much, because you're like, wow, a dude is leaving the promotion and you're saying, I wish he wouldn't have. We dropped the ball on this. It's only because it's so rare that you do that. And, I mean, that's what a promoter is going to do. Nobody's going to praise somebody going to another organization and say, hey, we don't know where he's going to end up, but make sure you buy their pay-per-view because this guy's the real deal. He's promoting his own brand. So to answer your question, I don't know that there was any of the personal animosity and beef and hatred, but I'm sure when you can't get a deal done, there's going to be some frustration. And now it kind of messes everything up, right? I mean, this is a huge fight in March, but there's going to be people saying, yeah, but it's not the fight that we wanted to see. And when the belt goes over one of those two guys' shoulders, you're going to go, yeah, but is that the real belt? You know what I mean? And it is. But yes, that's why there's frustration there for Dana White, and that's why he's not going to praise Francis Ngannou on his way out the door.
So before we get into the potential of what the new heavyweight title picture is going to look like, I want to get into, which is ironic, because 2 weeks ago we were on this very show saying that what we were most excited for. And the number one thing that we both were most excited for was Jon Jones, Francis Ngannou. Yes. What's going to happen? Are they going to get a deal done? And then the potential mega show that would have been. And we even talked that could just stand alone. It doesn't need anything else. It doesn't need a headlining co-main event. It literally needs nothing. We have the answer to that. So let's, we still have a couple more check marks that we could book of what we're looking forward to, but we got to put an X through our top one because it ain't happening. With that being said, crystal ball Francis Ngannou, like, what is he going to do? I heard that bare knuckle is going to make a pitch for him. Of course, they're going to throw some crazy money at him. It doesn't seem like the smart move for Francis Ngannou. But if you were a betting man, crystal ball it for me. Where's he going? What's he going to do? Or is he just going to sit on and rest on his laurels? I mean, he's a millionaire. He's multi-millionaire.
So I tweeted yesterday, the biggest challenge for any promoter is going to be getting a quality matchup for his second, third, and fourth fight, right? That's going to be the biggest thing. So that's what so intrigues me about where he ends up. If I'm betting, I think the first one is boxing. I think that's what he tries to do first. That's the passion that he wanted. That's what he was chasing after. That's what he wanted to do. And he really has been kind of teasing a fight with Tyson Fury. Now, the sad thing is, I don't think that it's an incredibly competitive matchup. I think Tyson Fury is a far better boxer, but, Francis Ngannou wants his chance to chase his dream, and I think that could sell to the casual fan. Even though, I think people that are, embedded in combat sports like yourself, like me, probably wouldn't say that it would be a great fight, I think it would be an easy one to sell. Tyson Fury is obviously an incredibly accomplished boxer. You put the highlight reel of Francis Ngannou in front of people that may not have seen it before, and you see those vicious knockouts. You just look at the guy and you can tell he's an absolute killer. I think it could probably sell and he could make some money off that. So I think that's move number one. Now, I think there still ends up being an MMA home for him. Now, where that MMA home ends up being, I don't know. There's some interesting spots. Now, immediately after the news broke, the PFL tweeted a GIF of, and I'm not up on my pro wrestling, but I believe it was Hollywood Hogan when he went to the WCW. So they tweeted a GIF of him doing that, which obviously would be a superstar leaving to go to a new promotion. Right now, does that mean that they're just teasing it there? Does that mean that they've got something in place? Let's not forget, they've got their pay-per-view coming up this year as well. They've already signed Jake Paul.
The Super Fight Series.
The Super Fight Series. Now you bring Francis Ngannou. But then here's the interesting thing is I think you have to think about, from a promotional standpoint, who do you match him up with? Because I do believe that Francis Ngannou is a draw, especially that first one. That's going to be a big draw. The reigning UFC champion has left the UFC and has come to compete in our organization. That sells itself. But that's why I say the challenge becomes, what's the second fight? What's the third fight? What's the fourth fight? Because let's be honest, heavyweight is notoriously the thinnest division in mixed martial arts. I mean, there's just not as many quality athletes as there are as, say, like the welterweight division, the lightweight division. So you don't have a ton of names out there that you can pair him up with. So I'm really interested to see where he ends up with. Now, I did throw this out there as well. Another tweet I sent out there is, can we just say New Year's Eve, Saitama Arena, let's make sure we get him in there for a fight with Ryzen or Bellator, whoever's co-promoting, because I think him on a New Year's Eve spectacular would be great. But I don't know. It's just so interesting to see, can he do one-offs in different organizations? Can he go globe-trotting around the world and fight champ? Who knows? But I think the first move is boxing, and I think it's going to be up to a promotion to make sure that they're playing chess, not checkers. That they're not saying, hey, let's bring Francis in because that's going to get us big money. You got to think about who you're going to match him up with, not only first, but second, third, and fourth.
I think to understand where Francis is coming from, and a lot of people are praising him for leaving the UFC. A lot of people are being like, man, dumb move. I'm not going to speak on it in either way. I mean, ultimately, from a career path move for like the greatest of all time talks and this, that, and the other, bad move, right? From that perspective. From a dollar's perspective, like, listen, he needs one boxing match to make $50 million with Tyson Fury or somebody, right? So good move.
Yep.
But I think if you understand the story, the life story of Francis Ngannou, this move makes perfect sense. Now, for those of you who don't know, Francis Ngannou had a crazy immigrant journey through the desert. I mean, the horrific of the horrific, being kicked out, to eventually get in France. And if you guys want a timetable of this and hear it from him himself, go and check out an old Joe Rogan podcast that he did. It had me riveted, and I was a Francis Ngannou fan from that day forward, just for what this guy has overcome in his life. I mean, I'm not even going to try and do it justice because I can't.
Nah, the first time I heard it was just blown away, man. It's an unbelievable story. It's worth checking out.
Unbelievable. So I say all that to say this. He immigrated to France to be a pro boxer.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he wanted to do. You think this guy, with all that he came from, who is literally the UFC heavyweight champion of the world, has millions and millions upon millions of dollars, his financial future is already set. You think he gives a damn about any of the little nuanced details of I'm going to be the best MMA guy of all time, the UFC is the only promotion? Hell no, he doesn't. I can speak for him, and I don't even know him. So to know his story, to understand this move, it makes so much sense to me.
Yep. And that's why I think boxing is the first move, because you nailed on it, right? That was his first dream. That's what he wanted to do. And then Fernando Lopez saw him at the MMA factory and was like, look, we could take you boxing, but with your size, your frame, I mean, we can get you, again, we touched on it, heavyweight's the thinnest division in mixed martial arts. I can get you to the top level much faster in mixed martial arts than I can in boxing. Do you want to try it? And he's like, if you think that's the best way to go, let's do it. But the first passion was boxing. And I think the biggest paycheck is boxing. And I don't think his stock has ever been higher, because he could go sign somewhere else and lose. I mean, he's a great fighter, but in the heavyweight division, anybody can land a shot and change everything. And that's why I think the first move is boxing. He's got some money in the bank, so he doesn't have to rush it. It would be a big payday. I don't think it would be as big as, say, a lot of people are comparing it to like Maymac, right? Mayweather, Conor McGregor. It wouldn't be that big. You're talking about two cultural icons right there that collided for that, but it would still be a hefty payday, and then you could still come back to mixed martial arts. So that's why I think boxing is the first move. And to your point, it's a brilliant move. And you are right. I think it's going to be hard. Right now, Francis Ngannou is widely considered as the best heavyweight on planet Earth. Now, how long he can maintain that reputation if he's not fighting the best of the best every single week, time in and time out, we'll see. We'll see how long people continue to give him that reputation. But you're 100% right. Guess what? When it comes time to pay your rent, you can't go tell the landlord, hey, I don't got money, but you know what? I'm the best on planet Earth. What's that worth? It's like nothing. You need to pay the rent. You know what I'm saying? And so that doesn't get you money. That doesn't, take care of your family moving forward. So that's why I think boxing is the next move. We'll see. We'll see. Again, I think if he signed with an organization like PFL, I think wherever he signs, he's going to make sure that those organizations allow him to box. I think that's going to absolutely be in his contract. And for those organizations, I think it makes sense more than the UFC because they're not putting on as many pay-per-views. So if they can say, hey, we can have you under our banner, but, you can go compete over there and we don't have to pay that salary. They do. We're good with that. And then we'll bring you back whenever we can. However, again, there's a risk that he could lose in his first bout somewhere else. So I think he does the boxing first because the marketing level that he's at right now is never going to be higher.
And do you think a guy like Francis, who everything that he has overcome with money in the bank and what we know about his journey, hard journey, going back to his first love of boxing and getting a shot at maybe even the world title, you don't think that he's not going to jump on that? Of course he is.
That's the dream. That's the dream. To live the dream, man. How unbelievable would that be? And what a remarkable accomplishment to be. Again, I hate to say it. I hate to be the realist. I don't think he would stand a great chance in there. But
he would not. Yes.
And that's not speaking on him at all. Let me make that clear. It's just that an elite mixed martial artist facing an elite boxer in boxing is at a disadvantage. That's their sport. In the same way that an elite boxer coming to martial arts and facing an elite mixed martial artist, they're at a disadvantage as well.
We're at like 0-100. The only one is Anderson Silva beat, Cesar Chavez Jr. It's the only one I know of, right?
That's about it.
We're 1-99.
That's it. So I want to make it clear. I'm not speaking to his skills specifically. I'm just speaking to the reality of competing in two different sports. However, I do think it would be a spectacle that would appeal to the casual fan because, again, man, a heavyweight champion of the UFC, a free agent like this does not walk away, and that's why I think, again, his marketing power right now is greatest as he's the UFC champion that walks away. If he wins a title somewhere else, okay, yeah, that still means something, but I think right now is when you strike. That right now is when the iron is at its hottest.
I posed a question to you 2 weeks ago, and I said, do you think the Jon Jones portion of this deal is done? And you said no. According to Dana White, it was, and he had been wanting to fight since October. Like, it was done in October and ready to go. So Jon Jones is out, Ngannou is out. Jon Jones has been, according to Dana White, clamoring at the chance, not even just to fight Ngannou, to fight anybody. He wants back in, and he wants back in bad. But now with Francis out, the logical opponent, Ciryl Gane, what a fight we have on our hands now. Jon Jones, Ciryl Gane in March, I believe.
Yeah, March 4th, right here in Las Vegas, the aforementioned T-Mobile Arena that broke the news. They're going to get to host the fight as well. And it's a phenomenal fight. Obviously, it loses a bit of the luster in terms of, the greatest light heavyweight champ moving up to face the reigning heavyweight champ, the scariest dude on the planet. Obviously, the power that Francis Ngannou has is otherworldly. So it loses a bit of that luster. But in terms of just two athletes matching up, and you think of the possibilities, Ciryl Gane is a phenomenal fighter. And, man, you look at the betting line since this thing has been announced, man. It opened with Jon Jones at a -200. It's already been bet down to him at around a pick 'em at this point, both of them at -110. So that just goes to show you how much respect people have for Ciryl Gane. You're talking about Jon Jones, potentially the greatest fighter of all time, but moving up a division, hasn't competed in 3 years. Is he as sharp as, somebody like Ciryl Gane, who's an incredible athlete? Jon Jones is going to have the wrestling advantage, that's for sure. And if he can take advantage of that, it's going to be a tough one for Ciryl Gane. But if he can't get inside, Gane's packed that natural power. He's got great athleticism. He's got great speed. It's a great matchup.
Dare I say it's a harder matchup. Now, listen, Francis Ngannou had the one-hitter quitter. He had the ungodly power, and you get hit by him, it's a bad day. Ciryl Gane poses so many risks and so many dangers. His movement is phenomenal. Listen, he blew out Francis Ngannou's knee with a heel hook as well, right? So he has some serious skills. What we saw him do to Tai Tuivasa was impressive. And I always said I think Ciryl Gane was the better fighter between him and Francis Ngannou. Francis Ngannou literally just took him out of his game plan. I don't think he anticipated the wrestling in that fight. So Ciryl Gane to me is the much harder opponent. Ciryl Gane is almost a clone of Jon Jones. The way they fight at range, Jon Jones uses a little more elbows, a little more, linear kicks to the knees, things in that. And his wrestling is going to be better. But from the diverse striking standpoint, Ciryl Gane is going to hang with him. Jon Jones is not going to blow him out of the water there.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think this is a very difficult challenge. I think this is one, to be honest with you, that Jon Jones does have to turn to that wrestling. I think if he tries to take this as a 25-minute, striking match, I think that honestly favors Ciryl Gane here. So I think Jones is going to have to turn to the wrestling. And again, you're talking about a 3-year layoff. I mean, that is significant. That to not have that full game speed, you know what I mean? Like an actual fight. You can spar all you want, you can drill all you want, you can train all you want, and that can get you ready. But nothing will substitute actually being in there in the cage. Now, Jon Jones has a wealth of experience before that, so it's not as if he's coming into this green. I mean, he's been at the highest level. He's been in the spotlight. He's been in these big moments. He's going to respond. But again, there's that ring rust. How's the timing early on? And I think that's going to be interesting to watch here. And listen, there's a lot of people that point to you and say, hey, well, Jon Jones may be the greatest of all time. His most recent performances haven't necessarily been the best, arguable losses in some of those. Now, I scored those fights for Jon Jones, but a lot of people didn't. The Dominic Reyes fight specifically, a lot of people had that for Dominic Reyes. Mm-hmm. I thought it was razor thin. I had it for Jon Jones, but it was very, very, very close. So this is a huge challenge, man. I love this fight. Again, I know it's going to get some criticism because it's not Francis, but if you can get past that and you can understand that, hey, Francis was just ready to move on, this is the matchup we have now, it's still a spectacular fight.
This is a very dangerous fight for Jon Jones. I have this as a pick'em fight, mm-hmm. and I consider Jon Jones the greatest fighter of all time. And I have this as a picking fight. Even if Jon Jones was not coming off a layoff. And I'll tell you why. The fighters that the only fighters that ever gave Jon Jones real issues were the long, rangy guys. Alexander Gustafsson, Santos, long and rangy. And then the guy you just said,
Reyes
and Dominic Reyes,
yep.
Long, rangy guys.
Yep.
Let's be honest. The DCs didn't give him a lot of problems. The DCs, the heavy wrestlers, they didn't give him problems. So that's why going into this with a guy who's long and rangy, young, hungry, with the skill set to match, this is a pick'em. And I'm not a little bit shocked that Ciryl Gane started as big of a dog as he did.
Yeah, I am too. And I think honestly, you see it in mixed martial arts betting lines. Sometimes the name value, the name recognition, right? Those stars still add something into the value because, again, you think about what the odds makers are doing. They're trying to generate, action on both sides so that they minimize their risk in terms of who wins and loses. So, I think sometimes that factors into the line, but I was a little bit surprised. I mean, Jon Jones opening at minus 200, I was like, whoo, I don't know about that.
Now you bet.
I know. I think a lot of people saw that, jumped on Ciryl Gane, and now here we are. 48 hours later, what have you, it's a pick'em. And I think that's where it needs to stand, to be honest with you. I think this is a pick'em type fight. I just can't imagine any better is looking at this fight and saying, I know 100% who's going to win this fight. This fight has already happened as far as I'm concerned because of all the factors that you mentioned. Now, again, if Jon Jones turns to that wrestling, if he can implement the wrestling and the timing is still there, the speed is still there, after these 3 years, then he can win this fight. I don't want to say easily, but he has a significant advantage in that department. I mean, if Francis Ngannou can take down Ciryl Gane, and I don't mean that as any disrespect to Francis Ngannou, but if Francis Ngannou can take Ciryl Gane down, Jon Jones can absolutely take Ciryl Gane down. And listen, haven't seen Jon in a little while, but the footage I've seen and the one time I did stand next to him as he was in the move up to this heavyweight, like, he was a legitimate heavyweight. I mean, he is packing on the muscle and doing it the right way. So, I don't think he's necessarily be outsized there. But again, the timing, we'll see. I love this matchup. I can't wait to see it, and I think it's an awesome fight for the heavyweight title. What you do with the winner? Do you rank them number one in the world? Yeah, probably not right away. You know what I mean? Probably not right away. You probably leave Francis Ngannou there, and then you kind of see what happens, where he signs, where his future goes. But whether you put them at number one in your world rankings or not, they'll be UFC heavyweight champion, and that's an accomplishment, especially if it's Jon Jones. I mean, somebody that. Again, I'm with you, Eric. To me, I think he's the greatest of all time. There's some people that argue against it. They've got some other names, but he has to at least be in the discussion. If you're talking about the greatest of all time, you can't have it without Jon Jones in it. But if he moves up to heavyweight and captures the heavyweight title as well, that's not a 10-pound weight move, moving from 45 to 55. I mean, that's moving up from 205 to face the actual biggest dudes on the planet. I mean, what an unbelievable accomplishment that would be.
You kind of tipped on where I'm going next and about the size. Nobody has really said, well, yeah, man, I guess you have, but even Dana White is like, I don't know how big he is. I know he's packing him on. Who's going to come in the bigger guy? Cyryl's huge, but Jon Jones is huge too. Who's going to come in bigger, you think?
I'm interested to see that. Yeah, I mean, when I stood next to him, he was wearing a suit, so it wasn't a workout. It was at the UFC Hall of Fame. But you could tell. I mean, you could just see the difference in his frame, even if he was wearing a suit. So he's definitely packing on the muscle. And you think about it, right? Two brothers in the NFL. So you think about, yep. The family has shown the ability to pack on muscle and be around, huge. So look, there's a possibility that it ends up being Jon Jones, right? I mean, Ciryl Gane's not the, push the 265 limit every time. He's not that guy. There was that era for a while where your Shane Carwins, your Brock Lesnar's, everybody was cutting down to 265. That's not necessarily the case with everybody now, although Francis Ngannou was. We're going to see. I would not be surprised to see Jon Jones as the bigger man, as crazy as that is to say, as the heavier man. We'll see. We'll see.
Do you agree that Ciryl is the more dangerous fight for him?
I do. To be honest with you. I mean, Francis Ngannou, again, one shot, it doesn't matter who you are, you're going out. He lands clean, you're going night-night. But Jon Jones had the ability, I think, to stay away from that. Francis can be a little bit wild at times. Jon Jones, an incredibly refined fighter. And again, I think Jon Jones had a significant wrestling advantage. I do feel like Ciryl Gane is the more athletic opponent. Now, he doesn't have that one shot. Now, every heavyweight, if they clip you clean, can knock you out. But, I don't think Ciryl Gane packs the kind of power that Francis Ngannou has. So now that one-shot danger isn't there, but I think he's much more athletic. I think he's much faster. I wasn't surprised. A lot of people didn't give Ciryl Gane much chance against Francis Ngannou. I did. I thought this was a dangerous fight for Francis Ngannou. Yeah, as you said, I think he's the better fighter. I think he's the more well-rounded athlete. Just on that night, Francis Ngannou was able to dig deep, kind of turn to that wrestling, which we didn't expect to see, and got it done that way. So I do think this is an incredibly dangerous and more dangerous fight for Jon Jones.
Agreed. Moving on, UFC 283 this Saturday. We're finally back to a pay-per-view that nobody is talking about because of what we have been talking about the last, 30 minutes or so. With that being said, UFC 283 in Brazil this Saturday. Shake-up in the main event happened about a month ago. We had Glover on this podcast talking about it. Glover Teixeira, 33-8, takes on the upstart, the young guy, the lion, the young and hungry Jamal Hill, only 11-1. A lot of experience difference between these two and a lot big age difference. Glover, 43 years old. Jamal Hill, 31 years old. What can we expect out of this fight?
It's a good fight. You know, it's a good fight. Again, it's been so much change in the light heavyweight division. It's crazy to think that as of right now, as we were sitting here talking, the UFC does not have a heavyweight champion and the UFC does not have a light heavyweight champion. That is so bizarre to think about that. So they're fighting for the vacant title. It's a good fight. And again, I mean, people aren't really talking about it yet. I think that'll change as the week wears on. You know, you start to get the media popping up in Rio de Janeiro. Everybody's going to be talking about it. But there has been so much this news. Obviously, the Dana White New Year's Eve incident continues to be discussed quite a bit as well. So it's understandable. I think people will start to talk about it a little bit more. But it's wild, right? Because we just had a vacant light heavyweight title fight. Nobody got crowned there. So now we're like, well, shake it up. You two guys go away. We'll bring in two new guys, and they'll put it on. Yeah. It's bizarre. But
man, what a conveyor belt the UFC does have, though, man. What a machine it is.
It is wild, right? Your champion can give up his belt. You can bring in two guys. They don't get it done. It's a draw, so you can bring in two more guys, and it's Glover Teixeira and Jamal Hill. I mean, the depth that they have is amazing. Phenomenal fight. Jamal Hill, you know, upstart. Obviously, he's been on a run, man. He's coming up from Contender Series, Sweet Dream Stadium at the UFC Apex, as he used to call it, and now, you know, he's fighting for the belt. Dangerous on the feet, man. Dangerous on the feet. Phenomenal striker. He is fun to watch. You know, long, lean frame, packs power in his hands. Meanwhile, Glover Teixeira, one of the most beloved figures in the sport, man. I mean, it's honestly just such a great dude, a great energy to be around, and has an amazing story as well. You know, where, you know, was training with Chuck Liddell and was touted as like this next generation guy, but couldn't get into the United States because of visa issues. Lost a lot of the prime of his career competing on the regional scene in Brazil because he couldn't get in. Finally made it to the United States and was able to battle his way to a UFC champion. Then ultimately lost it last year in a lot of people's fight of the year against Jiří Procházka. But now he's back with a chance to regain it, you know, in Brazil, you know, his home country where he comes from. I mean, it is a great fight. I mean, Glover Teixeira packs a lot of power as well. Obviously, he's got knockout power, so you got to be careful with that. But the other thing Glover Teixeira has is a great grappling game as well. I think he's probably going to try to implement that here. I mean, you can't, you know, obviously, as you know, you can't just not try to strike. If you're just diving for takedowns, that striker is going to be prepared. You know, you've got to change the timing, right? You've got to grapple when they think you're going to strike. You got to strike when you think you're going to grapple. That's the whole key to success to make it work. But I think Glover is going to want to turn to the grappling game. And this, again, very competitive matchup. I see this one as kind of a pick 'em as well, if I'm being honest with you, man. I see paths to victory for both guys here.
Yeah, I'm going to lean towards Glover just from the experience level. I mean, I mean, we're talking a difference of 25, 30, almost 30 pro fights and high level pro fights. And that's what gives me the edge. I mean, the skill set that Jamal Hill has is very scary. It's electric. It's explosive. Where I see Glover getting it done is he's going to have to close that distance. Glover will take one to give one. He's going to have to close that distance. He's going to have to put him on the cage, and he's going to have to start bullying him there. And I think in over the course of 5 rounds, I mean, that could really, really, really wear anybody out. That's the path of victory I see for Glover in this fight. But that's a big but. It's going to be hard to close that distance. I mean, Jamal Hill, another one of those long, rangy guys that knows how to use it. You don't want to change levels on him right in front of him.
Nope.
There's a knee coming to your face.
100%. And the other thing you worry about, and I'm just being honest, I mean, at 43 years old, right? Father time undefeated. I mean, he certainly didn't look old last time out there. And this is an elite level athlete who is taking care of himself, continues to take. He's not, you know, one of those guys that goes and parties in between fights and gets out of shape and then has to spend half his training camp getting back into shape. He's not that. He's an elite level athlete. But you know, when guys start getting into their late 30s, their early 40s, you do start wondering, like, what's the night that they show up? And Father Time did, you know, have an effect on the fight. So you always just wonder. So it's a good fight. But I tend to agree with what you're saying. I think your analysis is spot on there. I mean, the high-level matchups that Glover Teixeira has had for years and years and years. Look, Jamal Hill, a lot of his fights have been at the Apex, right? I mean, what's it going to be like for him, you know, on foreign soil, you know, the bright lights, all the extra interviews, all the added media responsibilities, you know, being in there and the Brazilian crowd just chanting "U vai morrer" at him, and, you know, that he's going to be public enemy #1. I mean, the great thing about the Brazilian fans is they will make the foreigner feel incredibly uncomfortable. However, if the foreigner comes in there and performs, they'll definitely cheer for him, and they'll say, hey, that was a great performance. We just had to make you feel uncomfortable because you were going against our guy, you know. So Jamal will see that, but how will he experience it? It's interesting. It's a lot. I mean, when you get to that level for the first time, it turns out there's unexpected little mental challenges and thoughts and things along the way that you didn't expect to be there. So love this fight. Love this main event.
The simple fact that Glover Teixeira is 43 years old and fighting for a world title in the UFC, the premier mixed martial arts organization, is mind-blowing. I'm 43 years old. I'm 43 years old and I compete in the Masters 3 division in Jiu-Jitsu.
That's great. Yeah, it's funny, man. He was cornering somebody at CFFC in Atlantic City last year, and we both ended up in the same bar afterwards, grabbing a beer, you know, hanging out there, everybody talking about the fights. Hey, this was great. That was great. And I don't normally take pictures with athletes, especially when I'm covering them as media, of course, because obviously that's a little bit unprofessional. But in that situation, I had to, because I can envision the caption before I even took the picture. So I went over there. We both had beer in hand. Like I said, I'm a little bit older than he is, and we took a picture, and I just put it on Instagram. And I was like, hey, just a couple 40-year-old fight fans talking fights. Like, we're basically the same, me and Glover Teixeira. You know what I mean? We both love the sport. We're both hanging out. We're like the same guy, more or less. And no, we are not. This dude is fighting the absolute best of the best at his age. It's unbelievable. And again, I'll say it again. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with Jamal Hill. That's the great thing about the sport. If you're not close to the sport, you may not realize just how great the people are involved in it, man. I think there's something about this sport, the dedication it takes, the fact that you can go out there and get your butt kicked, you know, in front of everybody. It humbles you. There's so many great people involved in this sport, but Glover is just even on the highest level of that, where it's like everybody just loves being around the guy. Great energy, positivity. And I mean, it was amazing. You know, like I said, when we had him on, you know, I saw him the weekend before this fight was announced, and I was talking to him at the Hall of Fame, or excuse me, at the World MMA Awards. And I was saying, man, Glover's, you know, sorry you're not competing this weekend, man. I know this was supposed to be your title fight. And he, I mean, without a skipping a beat, was just like, hey, man, it's all good. I've got a wonderful life. I'm here. I'm hanging out with my family. Hey, the universe will take care of it.
Yes, the universe will take care of it. I mean, it's all in the universe.
And it's, you know, 72 hours later, he's got a title fight. The universe took care of it. So, I mean, it's exciting, man. This is a good one.
Main event not to be outdone. I repeat, not to be outdone by the co-main event. Deiveson and Figueiredo. Brandon Moreno 4. Let's recap this. 3 unbelievable fights. First one in a draw. Second one, Moreno by rear naked choke. I think it was rear naked choke. Number 3, Figueiredo by was it split or unanimous? Either way, razor thin fight. All 3 fights just had this magnetism to it. What, you know, we always talk about, we want to see the trilogy. We want to see the trilogy. I don't even know how to describe it. But everybody's exciting to see the quad.
Yeah. It's crazy because normally, you know, you wouldn't think you'd want to see a fight for a 4th time. I mean, no disrespect,
like
right?
A year and a half.
Yeah, after you get a trilogy, you're like, all right, I'm good with that, man. I've seen this enough because you want to see fresh talent, right? And you know what's really cool to see is like even the other flyweights in the division aren't complaining. Normally, if the top 2 were like fighting each other over and over, you'd hear people go like, hey, wait a minute, what about us? Like, you guys are stalling the division. Hold on, what about our opportunity? And nobody's saying that because for these 2 guys to go 1-1-1, I can't ever think of another time in history where I mean, as soon as that 3rd fight was over, I'm like, got to see number 4. Got to see number 4. You got to put number 4 together. Took a little while to get it done. Obviously, Brandon Moreno went out and fought Kai Kara France in the interim, but we're getting a fight this weekend. Brandon Moreno going to Deiveson Figueiredo's backyard. I mean, going to Brazil to do it. I'm loving this fight, man. I am loving this fight. I'm so excited. And again, I mean, I don't even think you have to look at the odds to know that 2 guys that have gone 1-1-1 against each other, it's a pick 'em. Because how do you know? How can you confidently look at this fight and say, I know exactly how this is going to play out? I've seen a win. I've seen a loss. I've seen a draw. I don't know what we're going to see.
The wild part about this is the 4th fight in succession, too.
It is. For Deiveson, it's the 4th in a row. Deiveson hasn't fought anybody else. Brandon did get the one fight in there, but just the one against Kai Kara France where he picked up you know, the interim title in Dallas, Texas. So, yeah, for Deiveson, 4th straight against the same opponent. Wild.
I'm tremendously excited about that. And fitting, a legend is retiring.
Shogun, man. Shogun Rua, dude. I mean, that's an absolute legend of the game. It's wild to see him on the prelims at this point.
No,
you know what
it
I mean?
is not wild. It is beautiful, and I'm going to tell you why. It's on ABC. It's not even on ESPN. It's on ABC in prime time. The way a legend like Shogun should go out. People don't have to pay for it. You don't even have to get ESPN or ESPN Plus to see it. It is free on ABC. And for that reason, man, the showcase fight of the prelims, Shogun Rua retires on ABC. Did we ever think when Shogun was fighting in Pride, making his name, that this would be primetime ABC? Hell no. He gets to retire primetime ABC Saturday night in his home country of Brazil. You can't write it better.
It's a great way to look at it, and it really is. And I don't disagree with you, man. Those network television spots are big, so it is great to look at it that way. And Shogun, at 41 years old, we're talking about Glover Teixeira, amazing at what he's doing, and it's again for things like this. I mean, you see Shogun at 41, and I can tell you, Shogun, man, being around him on fight weeks, that dude, when sometimes we throw the term legend out there a little bit, but when he walks into a room, I'm telling you, everybody just goes, damn, that's Shogun. I mean, if you're a hardcore old school fan, that 2005 that he had, unbelievable. I mean, for anybody that maybe didn't, wasn't around during the Pride era, even if you didn't necessarily see all of it, think about this. In 2005, he goes 5-0 to win the Pride Middleweight Grand Prix, including wins over, in succession, Rampage Jackson, Antonio Rogério Nogueira, and Alistair Overeem and Ricardo Arona on the same night. I mean, that's insane. Absolutely insane. A lot of people, myself included, consider that to be the greatest calendar year of any fighter in MMA history. And I got a chance to ask him that last year, and it's so great because he only speaks a little bit of English. He understands it clearly, but he still uses an interpreter. But I asked him that, and without batting an eye, as soon as it got translated to him, he just went to the mic and said, yes, I believe it is. It's amazing. In English, said it right away. Like, I believe that is the greatest year of any fighter in history. Shogun is a legend. Hate to see him go away, but, man, the body of work that he threw out there, obviously ended up, coming over to the UFC and becoming UFC champion as well. You had that series with Lyoto Machida when those two guys were at the top of the game. Fought Chuck Liddell, fought Mark Coleman, fought Jon Jones.
And he may have the single greatest fight in the history of the UFC, damn near MMA, with Dan Henderson. If anybody remembers that fight, Shogun took the beating of his life in round number 1. And honestly, I thought that last round should have been a 10-8, and I thought Shogun should have got the victory. It didn't turn out that way. It was a 10-9. Hendo ended up winning, but it may be one of the greatest fight, if not the greatest fight in UFC history.
Absolutely. Maybe. No, it was one of the greatest. I mean, if you want to say the greatest, there have been a lot of great fights, but you cannot talk about the greatest fight and not include that one. I had the honor of being at that one and at the rematch as well. And the rematch was a phenomenal fight as well that he was winning and ended up losing to Dan Henderson, another MMA legend. I mean, literally, you just go through Shogun Rua's track record. I mean, it's the who's who. This man has fought everybody. An absolute legend. You hate to see him hanging up, but I love what you said, man. He gets to do it in Brazil. He gets to do it on network television. Even if you're not wanting to pay the pay-per-view price, you can tune in and watch this. And man, you hope he goes out in style. That's the bad thing about this sport, man. Is a lot of people don't go out on a win. They hang around a little bit too long.
Yeah.
I'm pulling for him on this one, man. I'm pulling. No disrespect to Ihor, but I want to see Shogun go out with a win.
Love him or hate him, I think everybody Saturday night is going to be a Shogun Rua fan this Saturday in Brazil. So what do you got on the docket looking forward to this week? Obviously, we got UFC 283. Any big plans for it?
No, I'm not making the trip down to Brazil, so I'll be watching on TV. I'm actually just found that I did 29 consecutive trips down to Brazil, and it's kind of nice to be able to sit back and spend some time with the family. But definitely watching this. I mean, Gilbert Burns is back against Neil Magny. That should be a phenomenal fight.
It's an interesting matchup to me.
Love that matchup. Gilbert Burns is a guy that nobody wants to fight. Neil Magny, a guy that will literally fight anybody. Which just says, show me the contract and I'm in. So anxious to see that one. Paul Craig and Johnny Walker should be a great one as well. So as you said, coming to this, a fight card.
Paul Craig, the only one to beat Jamal Hill, by the way. That Paul Craig.
I'm telling you, man, dangerous submission artist, and Johnny Walker, who can be dangerous as well. So, no, I'm excited for this card. As you said, nobody's really talking about it right now because there's so much going on, but that'll change over the course of this week. It's a good fight card, man. It's a nice pay-per-view.
Now, I do have to kind of, kind of give you credit where credit's due when it comes to the Dana White situation, right? So Dana White said, kind of echoed your statements of last week. Like, well, what are they going to do to me? Like, my personal life is what I care about, not my work. It's going to, like, what could really happen to me professionally? Like, I don't have to work. And he reiterated that. And you know what? For the horrible thing that he did, Dana White is facing it head on. He's not running from it, which is, I guess, in a completely cowardice way, a very, very manly thing to do. Like, what his act was cowardice. He's admitted it. I'm not talking out of school, but he's facing it like a man.
No, I have to applaud him. You don't applaud him for the act that took place on New Year's Eve, of course. Obviously, striking your wife, not a great thing, but he has come straight out and mentioned, man. I thought, the fact that he showed up to media day this past Wednesday before any of the fighters showed up and owned it again, despite the fact that he'd already owned it to TMZ. I think a lot of people thought, well, yeah, I mean, obviously that was kind of a pre-planned thing with TMZ, but how about you come actually speak to the media? Let us ask the questions that we have. Let us talk to you about it. I mean, the fact that he came in and I loved what he said. It's just like, listen, today is about the fighters. I don't necessarily want them to have to address all this. You can ask them if you want, if they're free to say whatever they want, but I want you guys to be able to focus on the fights. Let me again reiterate how wrong I was. And I love that because one of the questions I had for him was, there's a large group of people that have come out in support of Dana White and said, well, she struck him first, so all bets are off. And I know that Dana doesn't feel that way. And so I wanted to ask him, hey, do you want to address this? And without me even asking him that question, he said, and by the way, I never anticipated this, but let me say to all those people that are defending me, absolutely do not defend me. There is nothing right about how I acted simply because my wife struck me first. So stop with that. So I thought, again, as you said, handling it the proper way, taking it head on, accepting all responsibility, not making any mistakes whatsoever. And I know it's not a popular opinion. I know a lot of people are saying, he's got to face the music here. I just don't understand what the punishment would be. Now, thank you for your props. I have echoed what you have said last week and people that I've talked to, because Eric, you're the only one that I've really heard say this, so if I'm being 100% honest, but I do agree that if you're going to suspend them, what you should do is take him out of office, whether it be, a month, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it may be, and take that money that he would have made and give it to domestic violence charities, whether it be awareness, prevention, whether it be helping victims. I love that idea. And I will say that I think that is where the UFC reaction to this is falling short. I've heard a lot of people say, well, we need to hear from Endeavor. We need to hear from the UFC that it's not okay, that we do not stand in support of this, that we denounce that. And I'm like, okay, I get what you're saying, but what does a public statement do? Like, okay, cool. Like, you put something on some letterhead, I guess. Like, that's nice. What I would really like to see is the UFC, commit some resources. That was what we talked about before, but I'll stand on. I would love to see them take this opportunity to make domestic violence prevention and to make the assistance of domestic violence victims a charitable goal that they have. They're so involved in charity organizations already. They do so much good work in the community, both here in Las Vegas and, nationally and with bigger organizations. I would just love to see this. So I don't disagree with what Dana said. Like, what are you going to do to me? Like, okay, suspend me. Does that really do anything? Like, I'm wealthy. I don't need this job. And I tend to agree with that. But I don't think that just means that you should say, and I apologize, and let's go. You could still make good out of this. And that's what I would really like to see from the UFC. It doesn't seem that that's necessarily in their plans right now, but who knows? Maybe some discussions are happening behind the scenes. Maybe there's still an opportunity to make good out of this. It's been less than a week since he came and talked to us. It's only been 2 weeks since the incident. I don't think it's necessarily over. I would like to see some further response. As I said from the beginning, I'm not of the opinion that removing him, suspending him does anything really. I would prefer to see good come out of this.
Well, I will freely admit, John Morgan, that I've had technical difficulties. I didn't get to hear what you just said the last 3 minutes. I'm sure it was tremendously insightful You listen, you're just a man of great words and wisdom. I will be able to catch it when this comes out, but my earphones went out. I don't know how to turn the volume on. Like, I don't know what happened. Thanks for humoring me. Do you see me? I'm just sitting here nodding a lot. With that being said, for John Morgan, I'm Eric McMahon. Enjoy the fights.